Hey everybody, I'm Alex. I am one half of 2 Scoop Games. So, okay, cool. So,
let me know when to start.
Started.
So,
okay. So, anybody know what a Sprite sheet is?
Yes.
So, Sprite sheet, if you don't know, it's kind of like a film strip. There's a bunch of pictures, and when you play those pictures one at a time, it looks like it's moving. So, has anybody here heard of Aseprite? Okay, so Aseprite is a tool. It's like if you took the parts of Photoshop that are for pixel art and made them really improved them and made it just for pixel art, and it's really good for animation as well. So Aseprite, there's 2 ways to get it. You can buy it for $15, and if you're a nerd, you can compile it for free. There's the GitHub page. So there's 2 links that I'm going to share, aseprite.org, and then the other one is the 12principles.tumblr.com. This is an animation reference. It's like a really easy way to see the 12 principles of animation, which were kind of, I guess, put into a term by some animators early on at Disney. And there's a book called The Illusion of Life. If anybody ever wants to check it out, I have it. I could borrow it. But it's a really cool reference for animation. So I'm going to make an animation with Aseprite, show you some basics, and I'm also going to show you this principle of animation, squash and stretch, and why it's really good to use for animations that makes things feel more like they're alive. So this is Aseprite. Everything about the editor is like all pixely, like even the file window stuff. So I'm going to make this. Let's do like 64 by 64. This is choosing the size of your canvas. Transparent is fine. I'm going to zoom in. So one cool thing about Aseprite is there's a bunch of color palettes. So you can see the color palette over on the left. On this color palette, you can do some cool stuff. There's a bunch of color palettes that are built in to Aseprite. Whoa, that loads really weird. So for the sake of today, I'm going to do the Game Boy color palette, which is cool. So you can look at this in your own time. But there's a bunch of cool color palettes. So Game Boy, 4 colors, really small amount of colors. Down here, oh, come on, why isn't this moving? Okay.
do you need a mouse?
There we go. Okay. So down here, there's and this is going to be not visible at all on the stream because I'm in the way. So down here, there's layers. Okay, so layers, you can paint on layers, and also there are frames. So there's a little thing there that says 1. So I'm going to use a tool that makes a circle. It's called the ellipse tool. I'm going to choose the darkest color. I'm going to hold down Shift and drag out a circle, or yeah, there. Shift will make it a proportional square circle, if that makes sense. Okay, so ball. We're going to do a bouncing ball animation. Start up here with this ball shape, and then I'm going to fill it in. I'm going to do like the smallest little amount of shading. I'm going to make another circle inside of it, and then an additional circle up here that'll act like a little highlight. Switch to the paint flood fill or whatever it's called tool. Fill this stuff in. Okay, so now we have this circle that looks. Should have brought a mouse. Yeah, so circle. Okay, so we're gonna make the circle bounce up and down. So I'm going to right click on the little frame 1. I'm going to add a new frame. There's 2 options. There's add a new frame or add an empty frame. I'm going to add a new frame because that keeps what I had. I'm going to turn on this little thing here. This is an onion skin. It lets you see the previous frames as a little faint outline kind of thing. I'm going to click on this thing and turn on this thing called red blue tint. That makes the previous, every other frame red or blue, which just helps you see them better. I'm going to keep adding frames by right-clicking and going to New, move it down a little bit. New, move it down a little bit. New, move it down a little bit. So let's say that that is hitting the ground right there. I'm going to do New, and then I'm going to have another frame where it's just on the ground. new. Now it's going to bounce back up. New, back up. And we want a looping animation. So that means that the last frame has to match up with the first frame in a way that you don't actually want the first and last frames to be the same. You want the last frame to be the frame that looks like it comes before the first frame. So see how the first frame is at the top and this frame is slightly above the top. So now I can play the animation. So that is a ball. Does it look like it's bouncing? No, it looks like it's just moving up and down. It's just moving up and down. So to make a ball look like it's bouncing, we're going to use the principle of animation, squash and stretch. So for the purposes of this, it's not going to look super great, but we're going to get the motion part right because we got a limited amount of time. So on the frame where it hits the ground, so the big part about squash and stretch is that you want to keep the mass of the object looking the same. So when you're stretching it, with the ball, you're going to stretch it when it's going up. You're going to squash it when it's hitting the ground. So when it's receiving the impact of hitting the ground, you want to squash it, and that means move it, make it bigger horizontally. Now I've made it bigger horizontally, but it's still same size vertically, which means that it's actually taking up more mass than it did when it was a circle. So we have to squish it down so that the mass looks like it's spreading out instead of just like actually adding more size to it, which looks really weird. On this next frame, I'm going to make the squash even more dramatic. I don't know what that's about. Okay, and then the next one, it's going to pop up. So I'm going to leave that pop up. I'm going to leave that one round. The next one, we're going to stretch instead of squash. So just like with the squash, we want to keep the mass the same. So I need to make it thinner to look like it is taking up the same amount of physical space. And then this one, this is going to be the final stretch. Go down. And this one should touch the top. I think this one's up too high. And then this one should be a circle. That's the first one, first frame. Second frame, it should be stretching because it's moving up and down. Stretch it out. Next one. Stretch it out. So you'll notice that Aseprite has a way of scaling the pixel art, and it's adding some like interesting jaggy edges. People call them jaggies or doubles in pixel art terms. But now it looks way more bouncy. It looks way more like it has some life to it. And so that's because of this stretching when it's going up, squashing when it's receiving the impact of hitting the ground. Let me make that a little smaller so you can see. So that looks like, that looks a lot more fun. And now, how much time do I have?
2 minutes. 7 technically.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
cool.
You're fine.
Okay, cool. So now let's show how to make this into a sprite sheet. Okay, I've got a little more time than I thought, so I'm going to do a couple other things real quick. So I'm going to talk about doubles and jaggies. So those are some things. So Aseprite has a way of making circles, squares, and lines, and it'll make pixel perfect circles, squares, and lines. But you, when you're drawing, aren't always going to make perfect ones. So can anybody tell me, there are 2 places where I can see that this circle looks weird. Can anybody tell me the quadrants of, like top left, bottom stuff, the quadrants where it looks weird to you?
Top left. Quadrant 2.
So I think that it's like the top left and the bottom left. It's like right here. It looks looks not round to me. So it's like jaggies and doubles are like a little tricky to. It's more of just a eyeballing it thing than a science. But you kind of don't want. You're basically trying to make sure it stays round looking, if that's what you're going for.
Right on the left too.
Yeah. So basically, using the scaling tools inside of Aseprite is awesome, but you have to do some touching up. So right now I'm eyedropping that color and then bringing it over, and that's not perfect, but whatever. This one looks really bad because it looks like there's just like these square things sticking out here. So stuff like that. And then the other big thing that you want to watch out for is breaks. So that's a total like break in that outline. And if you're going for the outline, then you definitely want to fill that in, because that's the breaks are actually going to be the most noticeable thing when you're viewing the animation.
You're at 10 minutes.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to export the sprite sheet real quick, and then I'm done. So there's that. So Aseprite has all kinds of options for exporting sprite sheets. The one that I like to use is a horizontal strip. It just makes a lot of sense to me. Basically, it's just making. This is also really cool. So if you wanted to crop this image, if you cropped it on this frame with Photoshop, you're going to lose Photoshop doesn't know about the movement of the thing. It doesn't know that it's up here in the first frame. But with Aseprite, what it does is, I'll use the onion skin to kind of show you. If I look at an onion skin of the entire animation here, you could see that it takes up that much space. It's not actually showing the middle ones, but whatever. It takes up that width and that height and everything of all those frames. If you crop with Aseprite, it knows what you're trying to do. And so when you go to, let's see, maybe I've got to go here. Trim. So now that trimmed it, but it didn't cut off any parts of your animation at all. It just made the smallest possible space that all those frames overlapped would take up, which is really nice. And I've had to do that manually with Photoshop so many times. Did I say Aseprite's $15? So export sprite sheet, horizontal strip. You could do some crazy stuff if you're super nerdy and you need like the JSON file that tells what each of the sprites, what each of the frames is. You could do that. For my purposes with Unity, I just do the horizontal strip, and then I could click this open generated sprite sheet so it'll show us. So that's our finished sprite sheet. Ta-da! Done.
Sweet.